We had basically raised 1.1, 1.2 million, 600,000, 120,000, 300,000, it's kind of pieced together there in convertible notes. Those notes came with timeframes and caps. And so that really set the floor for the next round. And then the ceiling was really about the market appetite. And then in the middle, what could we negotiate to get done?
Welcome to How to Raise a Round, Carta's podcast about one of the most challenging elements of every startup founder's journey, raising money. Each episode, we sit down with new and veteran founders to hear the stories behind their funding rounds and learn about the challenges, advice, and unexpected lessons they learned along the way. I'm Josh Durst-Wiseman, manager of branded content at Carta and host of How to Raise a Round. Our guest this week is Craig J. Lewis, founder and CEO of GigWage, a fintech payroll startup for gig economy workers. Now today, you might know GigWage as a big Series A company, but before they raised their Series A and brought in the over $15 million they've raised in total to date, Craig had to have a whole lot of perseverance to keep his company alive in the early days. Today, he tells us the story of the raise where he learned the most, his $2 million seed round in November of 2018. Now, Craig raised his seed round in a unique way. He raised a priced round with no lead investor, also known as a party round or a family-style round. There were a number of reasons for this.
Most of your early money isn't coming from institutional capital in a lot of cases, especially for Black founders. I want to be really clear about that. You don't always have access to institutional capital. So you're doing the deals one-on-one anyway. This is why people do so many convertible notes and safes along the way, because you're just doing all of these one-off deals. And so, boom, I had already been doing that.
In November 2018, Craig closed this $2 million seed round from some big investors like Steve Case, founder of a little company called AOL, despite being told time and time again to just throw in the towel on his company. His story isn't just one of startup success, it's one of crazy perseverance under unbelievable circumstances. At the time, GigWage was at a low point. They were running low on the funds they raised during their pre-seed, and Craig was struggling to even afford his own office space. Craig was able to raise the money to pull GigWage out of the ashes and transform what he had, a minimum viable product and a small, scrappy team, into the multi-million-dollar company that it is today.
My name's Craig J. Lewis. I'm the founder and CEO of GigWage. We help companies pay, manage, and support independent contractors, freelancers, and gig workers.
GigWage's mission is to make it easier for independent contractors to get hired and paid. With an estimated 60 million gig economy workers in the US alone, investors initially recognized their potential role in the future of work. However, after their pre-seed round, GigWage's future wasn't looking quite so hot. There's no other way to say it. Craig was running out of money.
I started from a place of desperation. We had burned through about $750,000 for the original idea. I was looking for answers. What's the next best move? And like I said, I had some very influential angel investors, very wealthy, very successful people. And some of them in more of an angry, disappointed fashion were telling me to shut the company down.
Luckily, and you'll see this throughout the rest of Craig's story, he's just about one of the most hardworking and determined people you'll ever meet. His investors encouraged him to scrap GigWage and move on to the next thing, but he had different plans.
I wanted to be not only an example for other Black entrepreneurs, but also investors that could potentially invest in Black entrepreneurs. I wanted to set the standard. I just felt this responsibility to keep going forward, to keep putting one foot in front of the other until I could eventually get to an inflection point where we could take a big leap. I remember one particular investor who was my first investor, Jeff Rich. He said, your first loss can oftentimes be your best loss because you learn a lot from it.
Craig's decision to raise his seed round was more of a last resort than a personal choice. This time around, though, he had one key element that could set his raise apart from his first, a minimum viable product, or MVP, that he had built in 30 days in an effort to keep GigWage moving forward.
As I was heading into the seed round, the thing that I hadn't had prior to that was a product that people were willing to pay for and use. And so I was really riding the wave of this kind of technology that we had built in a sector that seemed to be really receptive to it. All of my personal funds that I could imaginably put on the table had been depleted. we didn't have any real resources behind us, but we had this good tech in this good space. And so it was this constant battle of getting up every day and finding the enthusiasm.
Craig had a product ready to go, but he was running out of energy and could only keep scrapping for so long before funds ran out.
You know, you don't have the people, you don't have the money, you don't have the resources, you don't even have necessarily the belief of others behind you. But then you have customers using this technology that's real, and you can see all of the areas of improving it. And so we were able to really kind of galvanize around the positive energy of the product and customers going into the seed round. And then investors really latched on to that.
The idea of an acquisition also wasn't off the table. Another company in the space was starting to reach out and ask for some information.
They put together a corp dev team and we're starting to kind of kick the tires around M&A, investing.
But here's the thing. Just because you hear the word acquisition, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a good thing. Let's talk about that for a second. There are a couple of different ways that your startup can be acquired. The best possible outcome would obviously be like an Instagram or a WhatsApp, where you get acquired for billions of dollars and everybody gets rich. Many times this takes the form of a defensive M&A, where you've eaten into the market share of a larger entity and they acquire you to defend against the incoming competition. Then there's a break-even scenario. This is typically where you could technically keep going on your own, but the resources that the acquiring company can provide you would ensure a greater chance of success in the future. Now, don't get me wrong, you could still have a really positive financial outcome in this scenario, but the main reason behind accepting this kind of acquisition is really resources. The acquiring company might offer you better reach, more relationships, better customer engagement, etc. And then there's the fire sale. Now, this is vaguely called an acquisition to help the entrepreneur save face, but what's really happening is that the company will die unless somebody acquires them right now. In Craig's case, where a lot of entrepreneurs may have seen an acquisition as a punctuation mark at the end of the story, he saw it as an opportunity to turn that acquisition into an investment and breathe life into his next big fundraise.
It kind of went out on this hunting mission to find smaller startups. What was really cool as an entrepreneur this moment was another one of those kind of, we might have something here. They came calling, they kicked the tires, they looked under the hood, they liked what we had. But during that process, that injection of interest, that injection of belief led me to raise another $300,000.
You heard that right. The potential acquirer gave Craig the sign that GigWage's metrics were showing potential. And by leveraging their interest, Craig was able to turn the heads of a few other investors.
We had another investor that was like, well, if they're interested, you must really have something. What will it take? And I was like, well, money. And so the actual idea was to give us enough money to build more traction and last long enough to get acquired. But once that money came in, it became even more clear how much more we could do and how capital efficient we had become. So this was really a great moment for us to know that we had market value.
With the attention of a well-known company on his side, Craig suddenly had a signal from the marketplace. He used the momentum to get the ball rolling on new investor introductions, or in other words, he took a terminal event and used it as a rebirth for a whole new round of financing.
I was squatting at a venture capital office here in Dallas. It's funny to say squatting because here I am at this multi-million-dollar venture capital fund. I'm around it, right? Like I'm seeing deal flow and seeing funds get built, and I'm contributing to them raising the fund. I think I might have co-authored some of the LP emails, so I'm in the mix, but I am squatting. And there was a company out of Minnesota called Dispatch that was raising their Series A. They had an introduction into the venture capital firm that I was squatting in.
The firm where Craig was squatting gave him an introduction to Dispatch, which in turn would lead Craig right to the front door of one of his most important seed investors.
And one of those introductions was with Rise of the Rest, Mary Grove. And so they were a portfolio company of Rise of the Rest.
Meeting with Rise of the Rest, it was clear pretty quickly that it was a good match, and they were interested in coming on board. But there was a catch. Rise of the Rest didn't lead funding rounds.
Their thesis mandated that they didn't lead rounds, which basically meant they didn't set terms to invest, right? And so they told us, hey, we're in, we're committed. You need to find a lead. We'll help you find a lead. but you're going to need a lead to set the terms.
Now, Craig makes an important point here. Because he was raising a priced round and not a debt round like a SAFE or a convertible note, it was important that he find a lead investor to set the price.
This was not foreign to me, and it's probably not foreign to a lot of entrepreneurs. Everyone kind of wants you to have a lead, and they'll wait on you to get a lead. I've never been one to wait.
Never one to wait. You'll find that's a recurring theme with Craig. Not only is he not one to wait, he has a knack for taking tough situations and turning them into big opportunities. He didn't fold in the back office of that VC firm. He didn't fold when a bigger company tried to acquire him. And with the clock ticking on GigWage's future, if he didn't have someone to lead his round, then he wasn't going to wait. He was just going to lead the round himself. So Craig set up a different kind of raise called a party round.
If no one was going to give me a term sheet, I thought to myself, why can't I give myself a term sheet? And that was really what started it. When you think about the entrepreneur creating the term sheet, that really is the genesis of a party round. Because now what you're doing is going out and selling the terms that you want to each individual investor or institution. So I was like, just because we've got some institutional money in, why does this have to be any different? And so put the term sheet together myself, explain the terms to each individual investor. In my case, it was a simple fact of saying, hey, we have a major institutional investor that's committed to these terms.
With Rise of the Rest committing $250K to GigWage's seed without a lead investor in sight, Craig realized that he was going to have to put in the work himself if he was going to bring this round together. Party rounds are most common at the seed stage. In a party round, you don't have a lead. The founder organizes a larger group of investors together, typically without one single investor leading the round. Now, party rounds aren't for everyone. They can be advantageous depending on your situation, but it's worth mentioning that lead investors do exist for a reason. They provide structure, instill confidence, and signal a level of commitment that puts everyone at ease, especially for future rounds of financing. A party round can have upside, but it doesn't have the same sense of endorsement from a reputable investor willing to stake their reputation on the success or failure of a venture. In Craig's case, putting together a party round was strategic. It would allow him to put big individual names on his cap table and collect a large group of advisors to give input that would help him succeed. And while he knew it would be hard to collect that many individuals without a lead to anchor it, he also knew that nobody was going to work harder to pull it off than he would. Craig rolled up his sleeves and got to work.
So we did a lot of party rounds in the early days. But the interesting part about that particular time was Rise of the Rest really did go to work to find me a lead. They made a lot of introductions. The challenge was they had committed to investing in our company, and we at the time were the earliest investment they had ever made traction-wise.
Rise of the Rest was going to help make introductions for Craig, but since it was a party round, he knew he'd have to do a lot of heavy lifting himself, too.
One of the things I've always learned to do is when somebody brings one to the table, you bring two. You want to make sure you're bringing equal or greater value. And so whether that's in filling out the round, whether that's customer introductions, whatever it is, I always want to make sure we stand on our own 2 feet. And then, like I said, you control what you can control. And that's the thing I could control is my work ethic and what I could bring to the table.
Craig's advice to early stage founders is this: pull your own weight. Go out, leverage, and meet other VCs on your own to prove that you have the work ethic and determination to succeed. While Rise of the Rest set him up with plenty of introductions, Craig ended up getting every single investor on his cap table through his own channels by way of the heat that each new conversation gave him.
When you're in the midst of a deal, when you're in the midst of a negotiation, being in that deal is leverage. Being in that conversation is leverage. And extracting the value out of being in that, and there are very tactical ways to do it. Some people call it things like name dropping, whatever you may want to call it. But extracting the value from being in process with reputable opportunities really gets other people excited. What are they seeing that I'm not seeing? What do they have access to that I don't have access to? What might I miss out on? And so the thing that I think I've been good at, more so than continuing to power through failure, is leveraging each moment that I'm in and almost hedging, if you will, and amplifying, if you will, the opportunity to make sure I don't lose.
Craig was also facing another pressure. the expiration of his convertible notes.
At that point in time, we had basically raised 1.1, 1.2 million, 600,000, 120,000, 300,000, it's kind of pieced together there in convertible notes. But yes, those notes came with timeframes and caps. And so that really set the floor for the next round.
Now, if you've fundraised before, you've inevitably stumbled across convertible notes at some point. They're a form of debt that's more common with early-stage startups. Basically, an investor will give you money today, and you'll promise to set aside some shares that you'll give them during your next round of financing. But here's the problem. Convertible notes come with an expiration date or maturity date, and Craig's maturity date from his seed round was coming up fast. This meant he'd soon need to convert those convertible notes into shares, which put all the more pressure on his party round.
The market appetite was a big part of the equation. How much could we raise? And when you started to look at that with the floor that we had, what was a good multiple and markup for those investors that had previously came in so that they would continue to be excited and motivated? That's really what set the formula for us as we went into the conversations and put the party round together for the next round.
But there was another area where Craig realized he needed to create some wiggle room: his valuation. Because the investor wanted to have an $8 million post-money valuation, that meant that GigWage's pre-money valuation would have to be $6 million, and the extra $2 million he was raising would be added by investors.
It should have been a 2 on 8 pre, but we did 2 on a 6 pre. You also want to make sure you have a good venture attorney on your side representing the company so that you are structuring this stuff right away. It's important to get that foundation. So I had a good lawyer that helped us get set up right so that we were dealing in the true numbers.
As Craig was building up his cap table, he recognized that there was one last ingredient in his raise that would really positively impact GigWage for years to come if he got it right. And that was the diversity of the investors on his cap table.
Whether it's your board or your cap table or your team, you want a diverse group of people around you. We're not talking about race and gender. This is, you want operators at the table. You want institutional capital at the table. You want people that did it in the 90s. You want people that did it in the 2000s, real estate, tech, because all of those ideas then can feed, and all of those networks can feed the company.
By assembling a diverse cap table and set of advisors, Craig could avoid a common mistake that many founders make.
You want to make sure you've got a diversified perspective and that concentration of capital doesn't carry too much weight into the direction of the company early on.
Okay, so Craig knew that high net worth individuals were going to get him where he wanted to go, and now it was time to study the game tape.
The way I think about it is, if you look at the savants in sports, and let's use UFC, it's not about does he have a hitch in his left hand right before he hits you with the right uppercut. How does he walk into the ring? How does he respond to the crowd? Who are the announcers tonight? What's the lighting like in the building, right? What happened 20 years ago in UFC? Where did our industry come from? And that is a level above of just that hand-to-hand combat and studying that.
Craig understood that it wasn't just about studying each individual investor.
For me, what I wanted to do is when I sat down with the table was be well-versed in past, present, and the future, and all of the external opportunities that led us to that moment to have that coffee or to have that drink. I needed to play the game at a level that gave me a competitive advantage. And so I'm much more macro with it. And I think the type of people I was sitting down with, they really appreciated that because that's where their brains often exist too. How does this guy see the world? And so I studied their world, my world, and figured out where there were connectivity points.
Slowly but surely, everything started clicking into place. Craig raised his first million, and after about 60 days, one of his angel investors stepped up and told him that he could raise the rest of the money if he just had a little more time. Craig agreed.
What we ended up doing was raising about another $750,000 to go with the $250 that Rise of the Rest was putting in. So we had $1 million. It was still taking a little bit longer because it was check for check for check. We had a guy by the name of Terry Quinn come in and top it off and put a significant amount of capital in to raise the second tranche of the million. And so it still wasn't even clean, right? It was a party round. I had one institutional investor, tons of angels. We tranched it, kind of 3 different closings, all for $2 million.
Just like that, Craig's raise came together. His efforts in making his own introductions had paid off. His party round was now full of high net worth angel investors from the Dallas area.
Besides the Rise of the Rest investment, I brought in all the other investors for the entire seed round. Through my network, my hustle, we ended up not even having any additional institutional capital. It was all high net worth individuals, angel investors, super high net worth individuals, and family offices. But I just think it's important to carry your weight and bring your value to the table so you can stand on your own 2 feet.
The money that Craig had been working to get in the bank for ages was finally secured, and the constant buzz around him died down. Suddenly, things were strangely quiet.
It's super anticlimactic. You do all of that work and all of that grinding, and then it's like, oh, okay, we have money now. But you start to feel it once you put the money to work, and understanding that like you can spend at a different kind of pace and there's still plenty of money there.
Craig had the financial security and the confidence that he had been working toward, all due to one thing: persistence.
As an entrepreneur, you're definitely going to notice signs from the universe. But as you keep going, what you understand is you create those moments. And really, it's your persistence and your conviction that creates those moments. And so you do have to be aware to notice them. But yeah, as an entrepreneur, you're definitely going to have signals that you can win. But what you really find is that you create those opportunities. It's your value injection into the world that you're seeing reflected back in all of those moments.
Craig's commitment to pushing through GigWage's toughest moments had paid off, and it would continue to pay off for years to come, all the way through GigWage's Series A. All told, GigWage raised $2 million in their seed round, which they tranched into 2 closes of $1 million each. He assembled a cap table essentially entirely on his own through his own introductions and unwavering perseverance. GigWage's seed investors were a mix of VC firms and high net worth angel investors from the Dallas area, including Steve Case, the founder of AOL.
That persistence, I think my team appreciated it along the way and still do. Investors appreciate it, your customers will appreciate it. But most importantly, when you look in the mirror, you will appreciate it. And so I have to be accountable to myself, and I owe it to myself when I look in the mirror to say, hey, you showed up today. And so that was the biggest thing for me along this whole journey, and will continue to be.
Next time on How to Raise a Round.
10:15 passes, 10:20 passes, 10:30, 10:55, the assistant comes in and says, he's not in yet, let me ping him. He comes in rushing and he says, hey man, I'm completely sorry, but I completely forgot to tell the partnership to do this.
We sit down with Nico Simcoe from Claire to hear how he utilized structure, simplicity, and gave off a sense of self-confidence to show investors that he was in control of his fundraise. This podcast is presented by eShares Incorporated, doing business as Carta, Carta Incorporated, and Carta Ventures. The opinions of the guests and host are their own and do not reflect the view of eShares Incorporated, doing business as Carta, Carta Incorporated, and Carta Ventures. Listeners should not treat any opinions or comments as investment, financial, legal, accounting, or tax advice. The content of the podcast is not legal, financial, or tax advice and is not meant to recommend or offer the purchase or sale of a security. This podcast is informational only. How to Raise a Round is a Hitstart Media production. The show is written and co-produced by me, Josh Durst-Wiseman. Hitstart Media founder Theo Miller is creative director. Olivia Laurie is production manager, with sound production by Nick Canepa and script production by Mary Kelleher. This podcast is presented by eShares Inc., doing business as Carta Inc., Carta, and Carta Ventures.